Hello, welcome. Good morning, good afternoon, where everyone's joining us from. My name's Brooke Brown. I'm the Director of Customer Success at Explorium. And I am super excited to welcome everyone to our webinar today about a really exciting topic. I'm joined by Sam Pugmire, the Chief Revenue Officer at Explorium, and Jason Hubbard, the COO at RevGenius, with experience in a lot of other C-suite functions as well. So get your perspective today. But want to just kind of overview a little bit about the exciting topic that we have to discuss kind of in front of us. So I think as we can all agree here is kind of the panel of speakers this morning, predictive models, machine learning, artificial intelligence is incredible. It's making its way into the scene, go-to-market functions across the board, spreading across multiple B2B marketing, sales, customer success organizations. And using artificial intelligence and machine learning, organizations can swiftly decide whether to continue with potential customers, improve business prioritization, enable our sales team to be more efficient and scaling, which we know is of utmost importance right now, and even target our right businesses at the top of the funnel. So today we're going to dive a little bit about the C-level perspective. So really excited to hear from Sam and Jason. I'll chime in with the customer success perspective on what it takes to streamline our tools, our businesses, our processes in today's market. And again, specifically focusing on that go-to-market funnel. So marketing, sales, and customer success. Would love just to kind of dive in a little bit to start with and ask each of you, maybe Sam, you can start with us today. Talk about a little bit of some of the pains that you've experienced before you kind of latched on to artificial intelligence or machine learning and how that's kind of impacted your go-to-market plans previously.
Excellent. Thank you, Brooke. And again, grateful to be here. Excited to be presenting alongside with you, Brooke and Jason. I think it's a really extremely relevant conversation and topic in today's day and age. So I appreciate being here. First, I would say it's a really good question, and there's a lot to unpack here. But for the sake of time, I've narrowed it down to about three that are specific to me and my experiences in my career. One is defining and identifying our ICP. Oftentimes in business, there are many differing noises. Excuse me, let's see here. Yeah, we have some many different noises. There's a lot of voices on the as it relates to ICP in the business, outside the business, at every level. Beyond that, we have understanding and discovering what the total addressable market looks like for planning purposes. Most companies, and my experience, do planning based on what's existing in their own database, and what's in their own database isn't really a reflection of the addressable market. And then lastly is evolving the ICP as your ideal customer profile, as your business evolves internally, as you release new products and features, but also as the market evolves. Your external factors evolve around you. How are you evolving your ICP? Oftentimes we set the ICP with some win-loss analysis, and then we don't look at it for another 12 months after product marketing goes through that. And then as a result of those three pain points, it's the misalignment across multiple departments. I know that in customer success, you might have a different version of what the ideal customer profile looks like than what sales or sales development or even marketing has. And so if you have dispersed ICP definitions, then you really have a dispersed go-to-market function. So as a result, it's difficult to move forward if you're not moving forward together.
Yeah, isn't that the truth? Jason, kind of any of some of the pain points that you've experienced, especially from go-to-market planning before you kind of leverage machine learning or artificial intelligence, you want to bring us into?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll take off my operations hat and put back on my demand gen marketing hat, which is where I've spent most of my career. So, this is all very near and dear to my heart. I'll echo what Sam said on the ICP side of things. If you're doing a snapshot in time as far as your ICP, then it's not going to take long before you're going to be have a misaligned model or misaligned targets. because it's always a moving target. Your product evolves, macroeconomic things come up. Case in point, what we're seeing right now, competition changes, needs of customers, all of these things change. And so if you don't adjust to those, and you're not aware of all of that, you're going to quickly fall behind, and your targeting is going to wind up being off, even if you started at like 100% accurate, which none of us do. And part of the problem that Sam already touched on is because a lot of that is because everybody gets busy doing other things, and then you sort of forget it. And so if you've got a model that can evolve with as all of that happens and do that largely automatically, then that takes a lot of that pressure off and keeps it from getting stale. But across the entire go-to-market function, this is a huge issue and problem that you have. Especially, I've been doing growth, quote unquote growth, since before growth was even like a concept or a term. So like when it came out and people started talking about it, I was like, oh, cool, there's other people doing this stuff. But the key to it is everything's testing, rapid iteration, data driven, all of that stuff. And so you've got if you don't have a sophisticated analyst on your team, which most of us don't, then you're kind of at the mercy of the models, the quality and sophistication of the models, and the end result is most of the models we wind up using are really simple. And so, the trick to that, the way that you can get around having to go shell out for an analyst, which is really expensive if they're any good and have any seniority, is to be able to have, models and machine learning. AI is huge. And on that front, I've been around this basically my entire career. I was early, user of things like Mentigo, Everstring, stuff like that. So I've seen a lot of the missed promises where like this was really ahead of where the tech was. I think I'm comfortable or safe saying like maybe the tech has finally caught up to the promise here with some of the things that we're seeing here just over the last year or so. And so that's super exciting as somebody that's gone down this rabbit hole many times with not a lot to say for it so far.
Yeah, I think even just looking further down the funnel, right? Both of you kind of mentioned a little bit about using, before we've leveraged, our artificial intelligence or machine learning, we kind of are throwing darts at a dartboard, right? A little bit, or you're continuing to make repeated mistakes because you're not using the full extent of all the information that you have. And so I know, especially as someone who's spent the majority of my career at the other end of the funnel, right? With the customers that after they go through marketing and sales, there's lots of opportunity to use so much of the behavior and the data that we have to drive operational efficiency. I mean, I've worked at multiple companies where we weren't using all of that information that we have at our fingertips, and we're operating really inefficiently. We're making educated guesses. We're focusing on the wrong customers, right? Or we're investing resources where they don't make sense. They're not going to yield returns. And so I think that's a pain point that I would not be surprised if a lot of members in our audience, today probably experience that same pain point, where we just constantly are making what we feel are educated guesses, but we're making educated guesses on potentially not full information, not complete information. And so there's really an opportunity, I think, to leverage that. Both of you also mentioned, obviously, the economic climate right now. I think everyone feels it in some form or fashion, even as just a personal consumer. And there's a lot of expectations on the go-to-market side of, continuing to hit your targets, which we should, right? Businesses are here to hit targets. I would love to understand from both of you, how are you kind of expecting to hit your targets in a down market? Obviously, there's a lot of talk about doing more with less, but what does that mean specifically for each of you? Maybe Jason, I'll have you start this time.
Sure. I mean, I get to deal with this on both sides of the equation, both, as far as what we're doing at RevGenius, as well as, the partner sponsors that come to us. And so we're seeing it universally. And, whenever you say do more with less, like that typically is falling in both bunch of different categories, from a budget standpoint, from a, size of team and team member standpoint, because of course, go-to-market teams have arguably been the ones most decimated by the layoffs that have happened, which is always always been a puzzle to me. Like, hey, we got to be more efficient and drive more revenue, so let's slash our go-to-market teams. Like, never made any sense to me. But regardless, that's the reality that most people are facing within that. And then the third piece of that is investors, boards, stuff like that are holding people more accountable for return on investment and what they're actually able to deliver. So that's a lot of pressure to be under, and the only way that you can answer all of those things is to get really efficient with what you're doing. And efficiency not just from a labor manpower standpoint, stuff like that, but efficient in your targeting and focusing on the right accounts, the right people at the right accounts. And so that goes back again to what Sam was talking about really dialing in your ICP, but it's even broader than that, especially whenever you start incorporating some of the things like actual behaviors that you were talking about, Brooke. And one of the really exciting things that sort of corresponded with what's going on in AI and machine learning right now has been there's been a explosion in the type of data and the extent of data that you can get your arms around. And so this allows you to really build some sophisticated go-to-market motions where you're bringing in really strong intent signaling. That's not like black box stuff like, a Bombora or something like that, but like, hey, I'm going to go out and I'm going to go scrape job boards, or I'm going to go look at what people are talking about through an NLP layer and start really bringing in some sophisticated pieces on the intent signaling part. But that complexity actually begs for and needs that AI machine learning layer, because now you've got so many more inputs and signals that you're trying to evaluate against. And so, it's exciting seeing these things emerge at a time that arguably everybody needs it the most that, it's been in quite a few years.
Yeah, I saw a lot of head nodding there. Sam, I have a feeling that a lot of that resonated with you, but kind of your take on that question.
Yeah, I think it's important that we recognize that we are not in 2020 or 2021 anymore. The grow at whatever cost charge from the board and from your investors is no longer the charge, and it drastically changed. It pivoted on a dime. Some of us without even really knowing or being able to foresee that actually happening. And so we still live in a world, though, to your point, Brooke, at the beginning, when you pose this question, where we're still running a business, we still are required to hit targets. And so it's all about, to Jason's point, growing efficiently, right? So what does that actually entail, though? Because even the tactics that were working pre-pandemic are no longer working today. Like, we have to be different than even pre-pandemic, and we can't expect to do the things that we were doing during the pandemic, during 2020, 2021, when things were, booming. There was a lull for a moment, but then it boomed. It was really incredible, unprecedented, and really unconventional. And so we have to be smarter than ever before. Before I talk about maybe some tactics, some of the things that we're doing here, at Explorium, and some of our customers are doing that I've heard that we've adopted here at Explorium, is one mindset. So this is more generally speaking. We in leadership have to have an abundance mindset in this market. We have to have a growth mindset and see this downturn as an opportunity to get a competitive edge, or even come out light years ahead if it is that you have a plan and you go execute that plan. So I think mindset is key, universally speaking, before we talk about tactics. And then second is framing your go-to-market motion and your messaging in the context of the CFO. At the end of the day, the CFO is going to be scrutinizing every single spend, expansion, renewals on contracts. They're negotiating heavily on contract terms and payment terms. I know I'm preaching to the choir, Brooke, on that front, right? On customer success, we're all feeling that. And then, but you have to frame up your solution in the context of the CFO. And there's a few points that I wanted to call out here that I find really helpful. One, they care about reducing cost. Second, maximizing productivity. So if your solution can help reduce cost, maximize productivity. And third, which is you got to be careful with, is growing revenue efficiently. Sometimes the revenue claims that we make about our solutions are somewhat pie in the sky, very much in the mindset of the customer. It's more like, okay, prove it. I don't necessarily believe in these ROI metrics, but if we can focus our messaging around reducing cost and maximizing productivity, and then the other two are mitigating risk and increasing customer satisfaction, or increasing net promoter score at the employee level, like employee engagement. But I would focus on reducing costs, maximizing productivity, as well as growing revenue efficiently. And then beyond that, AI and machine learning has come so far in the last decade. It's been more and more commoditized than ever before. It's more adopted and more understood. When my wife is speaking about GPT, it's absolutely fantastic to hear her talk about that. And she's a fitness instructor, and it's pretty cool to see that how far this is coming. And so you need to leverage ML and machine learning to not only be smarter and more surgical with who you're approaching, like your ICP, and with what you're messaging, when you're messaging, but also using technology to automate and to orchestrate your processes today. It is interesting, the world that we live in, that do more with less, hit your growth targets, but reduce costs at the same time. And we're sitting here scratching our heads, wondering how we're going to be able to do that with less headcount, less quota capacity, less resources on the operational levels. But if we can leverage technology to orchestrate and automate, we can extend ourselves beyond our normal capabilities as human beings.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with what both of you said more. So maybe I'll wrap it up with one final thing, and then would love to jump in kind of top of the funnel. But I think the other thing to call out here is, again, this common theme of doing more with less. It also provides us an opportunity to leverage machine learning and technology to be creative. I know we find that specifically at the bottom of the funnel, right? Customer success, not only internally, but I have the interesting peer view of also working with our customers at Explorium, and you're seeing so many different companies across multiple segments that are really pushing the limits and asking the questions of technology, like what can technology and machine learning do that maybe we haven't tried before? People are getting creative. They're seeing an opportunity to really dive in and kind of figure out maybe this challenge that we're all faced with right now. And it's an exciting time, I think, to be working in kind of the realm of machine learning and artificial intelligence, because we're really uncovering in real time what really all of the possibilities and the extent of the applications are. And it's because it's providing us this opportunity to push the boundaries, to ask creative questions, and to see customers, no matter the segment, asking questions that maybe without deep subject matter expertise in those areas, you would have never thought about before. And so it's challenging and letting everyone an opportunity to grow. So I'll kind of leave with that. I would love to dive in a little bit about marketing in general. I think we can all agree go to market starts at the top, right? It starts with leads and inquiries. And so Jason, I'll start with you kind of as with your CMO experience. How do you go about prioritizing your leads to become more efficient? We talk about more with less. That's the definition of efficiency. So how do you prioritize your leads? And second to that, how are you leveraging machine learning, if you are, for that exercise today?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I think arguably, the top of the funnel, demand gen function is the area that, certainly I think has the most potential for applying of, AI and machine learning. And that's primarily just around, well, two metrics. Well, one is just the sheer volume. Obviously, the more numbers, the more, your higher your sample size, typically the more accurate your models are going to be and the more insights it's going to give you. The other is the breadth of, the user journey and the education that they're going through during that process. So if you look at where they go from just like very initial awareness through to like understanding I have a problem, there's a solution to the problem, this may be the solution to my problem, how would I actually go and build this out, pitch this internally, whatever. Like that's a huge journey versus like what happens after it's passed to sales. Not to discount what's going on the sales side of things, because there's a lot there, but as far as like what's going on mentally with these targets, it's a much broader range that you're having to track and optimize against, because you want to target the people with the right content, focusing on the right things that they're interested in at that point in the journey. And so like that's super complex to do. And so I think it's no surprise that the initial, products that tried to execute, with variable results at best around this focused on things like lead scoring, because of those, characteristics that I talked through there. And so it's badly needed for a lot of reasons. It's also arguably where there's the most potential. And am I using it currently? Absolutely. I actually, the previous company that I served in a growth role at, we built actually a super complex, actually homegrown CDP. We were pumping all kinds of just enormous data into, and then we had models spitting out like scores and tiers of, yeah, hey, these are the accounts we really need to focus on that are sales ready. These are the ones that are in much earlier stages, and like we were able to spit out details around this, around not just a scoring, where are they in that journey and stuff like that, but even being able to provide context to marketing and sales of like, these are the hot buttons that they're interested in. These are the specific problems they're trying to solve for. And so like when you can do that and you can have people reaching out saying like, hey, I thought you might be interested in this webinar recording that we, from something we did like a month ago. And it just happens to be exactly what you're interested in and trying to solve for. Like, we're not going to say all of that, but like, holy crap, talk about higher conversion rates, higher reply rates, all of that stuff. And so like, that's the type of potential that you get out of this. Not just being able to say, okay, this is top of the funnel, middle of the funnel, bottom of the funnel, but like, these are the things that they actually want to learn about, that they are interested in. These are the problems they're trying to solve for. Is like that's a game changer when you talk about efficiency of go to market.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I think one thing that's very apparent and probably hasn't changed in the evolution of machine learning or just technology in general is that incoming leads typically don't come with a lot of information, right? They usually come with a name. Sometimes we get an email, sometimes we get a company. And so you're really, again, it's that concept of throwing a dart at a dartboard. Again, going back to just my experience in customer success, I have the opportunity to kind of have the purview of a lot of different customers and how they're leveraging that, right? We think lead scoring is very much kind of it's a one focus application. And so I kind of wanted to just highlight some of the expansive, like creative ways when we think about identifying and educating those top of the funnel, like leads coming in, that really allow us to find a reliable way to qualify, to prioritize, to again, work efficiently in our operating model. We work with quite a few customers at Explorium where we're not only leveraging the power of machine learning to score and to educate kind of and prioritize those leads, but also to figure out external data that can make educated decisions more robust, right? So not only leveraging machine learning to find out what data do we not currently have that we can supplement your data, which might make those leads even easier to prioritize and understand, but leveraging statistical models themselves, like a little bit like you mentioned in lead scoring, to prioritize those leads. We have two customers, Melio and Taboola, who are leveraging Explorium statistical models to prioritize leads that way, which are increasing efficiencies across the board of how their teams are working, and leading to higher conversion rates. Again, if we can really streamline and make our teams have the ability to be more efficient, everyone wins, from the team members to the company to the customers at the end, right? And I think we can all agree that's the trifecta of wins here, when everyone feels like they're contributing at a really successful rate for the company that they're supporting. Additionally, we think of things like lead scoring with underwriting models, right? Making informed decisions that have genuine financial impact. One of our customers, Idea Financial, actually leverages machine learning to verify the data of applicants that are coming through so they can make informed decisions on who they're underwriting. That has real financial impact, that they have a higher level of confidence in the decisions that they're making that are going to contribute to their bottom line. And additionally, think about financial sector. And again, this one is really feeling the impacts of inflation, layoffs, et cetera, but understanding risk level of those individuals. And we think about insurance, or we think about financial institutions, again, leveraging external data and machine learning, something that I've had a really close line of sight in by managing a lot of our customer relationships at Explorium, because we do allow them to integrate external data into machine learning models. It's been really fun to see the applications of how they can make informed decisions that have real business and financial impact. And so it's pretty fun to see on the front lines, and also just to see the power again of machine learning and technology all the way at the top of the funnel. Sam, kind of you sit kind of the next stage, but you see the entire go-to-market funnel. Thoughts on how we can be more efficient at the top?
Yeah, just a couple points that to highlight and double click on. I think if you come back to the context of the CFO in this market, that's who we should be selling to, right? Not necessarily selling directly to the CFO, but in the context of the CFO, having them in mind, and maximizing productivity, right? Increasing revenue and reducing costs. So if it is that, time kills all deals, right? I think every sales leader, if you're a sales leader on this call, you've said that phrase before. And if you're not a sales leader currently today, I'm sure you've heard that from your sales leadership at some point in time in your careers. But it really does. The conversion rate on a lead drastically decreases the longer you wait to route that lead appropriately. And so if you constantly have human intervention as part of that lead qualification, that lead routing process, you're already behind the eight ball. You're already missing out. And so using orchestration, using automation to be able to increase the speed by which, if you're dealing with large volumes of leads or complex routing or multiple segments across multiple geos, across multiple teams, the downstream impacts that it has on sales, I'll explain it. If the wrong lead goes to the wrong rep, or the lead goes to the wrong rep, you're going to have to deal with deal splits and people arguing and debating over where that lead should go. And you waste internal capital dealing with those things downstream in the sales development or sales in the sales teams. If it is that the lead doesn't go to the accurate place, but oftentimes the reason why it doesn't go to the accurate place is because it's not enriched with the right data, or it's enriched with bad data. So enrich your leads as they come in, automate that process as much as possible, and automate not just the enrichment, but also ensure that the data that you're enriching with is accurate across multiple sources of data, so you have accurate routing. The impact is material downstream.
Great. And I just want to acknowledge we did have a question come in from an audience member, and I apologize if I butcher your name. So, accept my pre-apology. But Preeti asked kind of if we just have any documentation around lead scoring in general. We absolutely do. We're working on that, and we'll make sure to follow up and get that to you following the webinar. And if anyone else has interest kind of in documentation around how we do lead scoring in particular and kind of that process, if you could go ahead and raise your hands, that would help us get a general understanding, and we can make sure to provide that information following the webinar today. So thank you very much for that question. I just want to kind of, before we jump into the sales, which I know we all have a lot of thoughts around kind of that middle portion, the conversion part of the funnel. You guys both talked about the impact of lead scoring and how we prioritize leads. Have you found that there are specific types of lead scoring models that have the best efficiency, or that are the most successful when kind of looking at lead scoring at the top of the funnel? Jason, any thoughts on that one in particular?
Yeah, to be honest, lead scoring and models around that have not played well for me in the past. If you couldn't tell about how I talked about some of those early solutions that I was, a user of, they didn't really pan out great. The traditional, like, dead simple lead scoring of, like, based off of activity is actually pretty terrible. In fact, you could argue it creates more noise than signal, and can actually be a net negative. So, the idea that, hey, every time somebody opens an email, I'm going to give them a point. It's like trying to translate that into actual true intent. It's like, that's a pretty broad gap. And so, those types of approaches have traditionally not worked well. And in fact, there's not really anybody that's a sophisticated growth or demand gen person that I know that hasn't abandoned that a long time ago. And so that really leaves you kind of two routes you can go. You can go the complex route, which you don't really have a choice other than apply some sort of an AI machine learning model to it. Or you can go the really dead simple route of, hey, I'm going to engineer the intent signals that I really am interested in and want to see. And so like I'm going to create content that I'm going to promote that you would have to be a really weird, bizarre person to be interested in or engaging with if you're not at that point or that stage. And so like you intentionally build that out and engineer it and engineer the touch points around it to give you those signals that you want. And of course, neither of these are mutually exclusive to each other. In fact, they both work extremely well in tandem to each other. But yeah, and I mean, like I said, until very recently, like talking the last 12, 18 months, yeah, I didn't really feel like I had a good option or solution to it other than that, dead simple engineered intent signaling. And so it's super exciting seeing the ability to open this up to more, complexity and sophistication.
Sam, it looked like you had a thought on that one. Want to chime in?
Yeah, as I think the first step, just before you begin any modeling, you have to enrich. You have to get as many accurate data points as possible on as many clients as possible. And then second step is oftentimes we have human intervention when it comes to scoring. They're more rule based or human weighted scoring, and the reality is it's opinion based. It's subjective and we want to be objective as possible, especially in go to market, and use multiple facets of the funnel. Not just what we think in marketing is deemed a marketing qualified lead. We want to understand from sales development. We want to understand from sales what a qualified lead looks like based on ICP, as well as customer success. And the more objective we can approach that using data and machine learning, the better. And then we can use the human intervention on top of the machine learning to then adjust and tweak what the recommendations are based on the data. We don't want to be opinion driven insights. We want data driven insights at the end of the day, or signal driven insights.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, with that data driven insights, would love to talk a little bit about kind of total addressable market, ideal customer profile, the bread and butter, not only of marketing, but of sales functions as well, right? To help us understand relative information, prioritize those leads, right? Really leaning into leveraging signals and data. Sam, I'll start with you on this one. We kind of talk about total addressable market. We talk about ideal customer profiles. How are you using data to understand both those things, your TAM and your ICP, as well as how do you leverage that information to influence your planning?
Absolutely. I'm glad you asked this because I think that this is where many companies miss the mark. I think at the earlier stages of a business, early stage startup, seed, Series A, there's plenty of addressable market, right? You don't even begin to think about reaching the ceiling on that effort at all until later stage when you have to now grow the team from 10 to 25 or 25 to 50 or 50 to 100 reps. And you have to take the company from 100 million to 250 million in revenue. You start to look at things differently and trying to find every which way that you can squeeze more out of that lemon. And so the idea is that we talked at length about identifying ideal customer profile. That is number one. You use win-loss analysis. You bring in some differing opinions, and you try to get consensus on the ICP. You want to make sure that the ICP is evolving as your business evolves, right? So we talked at length about that, but now let's use ICP to talk about total addressable market. So let's say that you know exactly who your ideal customer profile is. Now it's a matter of identifying what does the TAM look like? What does the actual total addressable market look like for that specific ICP? And most companies, and I won't name companies, but one of the companies that I worked for in the past, we actually approached TAM by using our internal Salesforce environment and not actually, our own internal Salesforce environment to do the TAM analysis was not a reflection of actually the universe and the globe. And so we did territory planning, split reps territories, and gave books of business based on what was in Salesforce, but not actually looking at what the addressable market looked like. And there's a statistic that says that 23%, so most companies don't know about 23% of their addressable market based on their current ICP that they're working on. They don't know where they are. They don't know how they're missing out on about 23%. They don't know how to identify them. They don't know how to access those accounts or those prospective clients. And so you use the ICP to not only influence to understand what the addressable market is, but then you need to leverage external data, not just internal data, not just your internal Salesforce environment, but you need to leverage about 1, 2, 3, 4, or as many external data providers out there that you can find to be able to give you an understanding as to what the addressable market looks like. And then from there, you can then make decisions on planning. Because at that point, now you can understand, okay, how many sales reps do I have, or what's my quota capacity? And is that addressable market enough to support my current team and a future team that I hire? If the answer is not, then you have to make other investments in product or in research and development to expand to other markets, other verticals, other geographies, to be able to see. And again, before you expand into those markets or other verticals and geos, you need to ensure that this is something that you need to assess the total addressable market. If you want to move into Australia in order to grow revenue next year, you have to understand what your ICP looks like in Australia. And so it's a really important process. And again, oftentimes we make investments in go-to-market based on headcount and increasing marketing spend and increasing headcount on the sales side and quota capacity, when in reality, we might be increasing headcount on an addressable market that we can't even support. We've already reached our ceiling there. And so I think it's important that we are leveraging ICP in the planning process. And beyond that, an ICP that's evolving, right? As your business evolves, as will your total addressable market.
You brought up a really great point there, kind of about just, again, educating, right, your total addressable market and ICP, leveraging external data. It goes back to that common theme that I think all three of us have touched on, which is data is power at this point. It's knowledge, right? It helps us make informed decisions. Specifically, I've had a lot of experience with our customers where we find so many of our customers are selling to small businesses or mid-market businesses. And accurate information around that market, those SMBs and mid-markets, is hard to come by. They're not legally required to publish that information on activity or revenue. They may or may not have websites, right? We're dealing with different levels of sophistication across those customers or those segments that they're addressing. And they move around a lot. I think especially we've seen this during the course of the pandemic over the last couple of years, right? We've had a lot of businesses that have gone out of business, opened new businesses, and that data can be hard to track. So one of the things that I think is most exciting about this idea of leveraging external data is, and that I've seen working at Explorium, is Explorium provides up to 97% coverage on small businesses in the US, and unprecedented coverage in across the globe, which is pretty remarkable, right? That again helps educate those markets. So you're making informed business decisions. It really helps customers, and ourselves included, understand the total addressable market and its fit, how we define it, and really understanding, all of those small businesses by getting complete information like categories, addresses, business contact information at those organizations. All of that is just feeding more knowledge for us to make informed business decisions. So really great point, Sam. Jason, any thoughts on kind of total addressable market and ideal customer profiles?
As you might imagine, lots. But before jumping into that, I think you made an excellent point that needs to be called out a little bit more, because it's rare that I run into somebody that actually truly understands this side of it. You need to understand the data that you're plugging into it. And so for way too many people, they say, okay, hey, I got this data from a Zoom Info or something like that. And, it told me that this company has, between 100 and 200 employees. And it's like, they're not publicly traded. How do you get to this information, and how accurate is it? Even more problematic is estimated revenue numbers. So like, one, again, it's not publicly traded. They don't disclose this typically. So now you're estimating it. And now you're having to try and back into what this looks like. mileage varies radically in these strategies and trying to do that. And I see way too many people take that as gospel. Like, hey, they said that it was between 100 and 200 employees and they had, 150 million in revenue. It's like, all right, we know that about them. It's like, no, you don't actually really. And then, and so, not just from the complexity of how to get to that data and, the ins and outs of that, but also mileage varies radically from one data provider to another. And even within that data provider, mileage will vary based off of industries, verticals, roles, personas, stuff like that. And so, you absolutely have to get a more sophisticated understanding of the data that you're using and plugging into this stuff, as opposed to garbage in gives you garbage out. And so that's an underappreciated, in my opinion, and experience aspect of all of this is like, when you're defining these things, when you're applying those filters and stuff like that, how reliable are those, filters or those signals or those firmographics, technographics? I mean, technographics is a whole nother ballgame. Depending on the piece of technology, the reliability may be extremely high, or it may be just, basically as good as a coin flip. And so all of that goes into it. But like we kicked it off with, these need to be things that are constantly evolving, you're constantly learning from. And so if you're not constantly tweaking, you're learning from that, then, it's not going to be a reliable, model. You're not going to have a well-dialed ICP or persona. I've also gotten to the point where I start to cringe whenever we start talking about ICP and persona and stuff like that, because I think way too many people look at it as monolithic. Whereas, truly sophisticated, companies, go-to-market teams, look at that more as multiple different ones. And so you've got, multiple different ICPs. Sam, you sort of touched on this, going into a new market, a new geo. Oftentimes will be a radically different ICP than what you originated with in a different market. So to say that like now this is our ICP monolithically, like that doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. Same story on like the persona side of things, like the things they're interested in, the use cases they have, the pain points it's solving for, and stuff like that are typically pretty radically different between those different buyers that are at the table. And so saying that like we've got this nailed down and we know what our pitch is to our personas, like, do you really? Like, do you have actual sophisticated pitches where you're speaking to these different things? And then, oftentimes those actually play in together. So now you've got complexity of ICPs plural, personas plural, all of the relevant aspects of that. And so, as you've seen through all of this, as you start stacking this complexity and start adding more and more data into it, like there's really no way to be able to sift and sort through all of that unless you've got some sort of a model to be able to go and apply it to.
Yeah, absolutely. I kind of want to take a pause. We've had some interesting questions come in from the audience. So I'm going to pose this one to the panel here. So we have a question from Kanako. Again, apologies if I butcher your name. But how do you take a data-driven insight when you're getting into a new market segment or launching a new product? I believe these ML approaches work as long as there's a good historic data. What can we do if there's little historical data? Anyone want to take a first pass?
I can take a first pass at it. So
Yeah.
This is always a constant problem. So you're spot on with that. So whether that's launching a new product, new company, or trying to go into a new market, or trying to identify a new use case, whatever, like you're starting with little to no data. So you begin with external signals as best as you can gather them, and do that with whatever signals are going to be closest proximity to what you're interested in. So whether that's product, whether that's your initial targets from an ICP persona standpoint, whatever, come at it from whatever external third-party data that you can get. And then as far as using and leveraging internal first-party data, you got to start where the volume is and where you've got the touch points. And so now we're back to top of the funnel. And then as you get more data and more signaling that's coming further downstream from that, you start optimizing further downstream. And my goal typically is to try and optimize as close to revenue as humanly possible. And so, obviously, if you're new to market, you don't really have much, if any, revenue to go look at. So now you got to start at top of the funnel signals, which can be very hit or miss. But at the end of the day, like that's the best you have at that time. And then as those start converting into MQLs, SALs, all on what it goes to actually close one, close lots deals. Like now you've got more data that's closer to what you're truly interested in, and you just keep refining and optimizing based off of the additional data and signals that you're generating.
Yeah, great point. Sam, I want to pose this second question. This one comes from Oscar to you, but he asks, what does it say about your HR process, recruiting the right people and bringing them up to speed on details specific to your business if you cannot trust your employees' opinions on open deals and leads, but the judgment of an algorithm?
Yeah, I think maybe to reiterate the point and to maybe clarify, the key is you need to have both, right? You need to have qualitative and quantitative data to be able to support the motion. Oftentimes, though, the squeaky wheel gets the grease. Okay, I'll use that term, that phrase. Okay, that sometimes your loudest customer, sometimes your loudest AE, sometimes your loudest CSM on the team is oftentimes those that get the attention. In the book Play Bigger, it talks about in an early stage startup in category creation, it's extremely important to understand what your true vision and mission is, and make sure that everyone is aligned to that mission and vision, and that you don't want to suffer from what they call gravitational pull. And gravitational pull is described as the loudest employees or the loudest customers that can pull you and your business, especially a small business, and pull you apart. And so the key is to do both, right? To first start with the algorithm and then to use human intervention on top of it, rather than just lead with a qualitative, subjective opinion about things, and then without using any external data or any other machine learning for that matter. It's not perfect either scenario, but both together is more powerful than not.
Yeah, absolutely. Great point. I kind of want to jump. Yeah, go for it, Jason.
I was going to just chime in with one piece there. I think I'm even less optimistic than you are, Sam, about the human element of it. Anybody that's been a sales leader, CRO, VP sales, whatever, and has had to go through the forecasting of your salespeople and your team, know how fraught that is, and how poor most of that signaling of those opinions are. And so I would say for almost all teams and the vast majority of your salespeople, you'll wind up with that one that's like incredibly accurate with their forecasting, but it's usually very few and far between. That like these are demonstrably not very valuable signals. And so sort of go back to the data. Look at how reliable have those forecasts and projections been. Are they better than a coin flip? Are they much better than a coin flip? Typically not. So I mean, I don't know of a VPSL, CRO, whatever that doesn't look at it and say, okay, that rep, he always sandbags me. So if he's told me that this is his forecast, I know I need to increase it by X. Or this rep's wildly optimistic, so I've got to go back and discount everything that they've said. Like, anytime you're having to do that type of thing, it's like you got to start questioning the value and the validity of those signals that you're looking at.
Yeah, I think that the interesting part in both of your answers here is that they kind of have a similar vein, right? Not only historical context, which allows you to make like human judgments on top of the algorithm, right? If you don't have a high level of historical context, but also on the internal side, right? Trusting algorithms with that human element as well. And it's true that a lot of customers, a lot of organizations, I think, struggle with that. And it is finding the balance, right? It is learning from the data that you have and then also identifying what additional data can you layer on top of. And sometimes that's qualitative data, sometimes it's quantitative, right? And it's a combination of both. And you're continuing to build that arsenal to make more informed decisions. But it typically is a balance. What that balance is, I think, really depends on your organization. And we've seen that a lot with our customers too, right? Some over-index on qualitative versus quantitative and vice versa. But in that case, there's always going to be a little bit of it's not structured. It's not the same for every type of business or every organization, but there probably will be a balance in some sort of that, no matter where you approach.
Brandon, I agree with that 100%. Sorry. 100% on that side of things, you absolutely have to have the qualitative and the quantitative pieces to it. I'll go one step further. For me, at least in my experience, the qualitative serves a particularly valuable and critical role within it of telling you what to go look for in the data, what type of tests to be able to go and build and be able to see is there validity there and stuff like that. Because otherwise you wind up, like you were talking about, Sam, with that center of gravity. So you get pulled into the direction that you've already seen signal, and then you can ignore and miss net new signal and net new things. And it's oftentimes that qualitative piece of it that gives you the first clues on that side of things. And the other is whether you're doing it, by hand and trying to create a simple model, or you're trying to apply an AI machine learning model. A huge mistake I see way too many people do is like, hey, I'm just going to throw a huge amount of data at this thing. And it's going to spit out an answer to me. Like, that's not going to work well for most of the time. And so you need to train that model. You need to point it in the right direction. You need to give it context. You need to say, these are the things that we're really interested in. And if you don't have that initial, framework for it, like, it's unlikely to deliver much to you. And again, it's that quantitative piece that gives you a lot of the insights into how would you go and structure that. Where do you begin?
Yeah, for sure. Brandon, we do see your question coming from the audience. We'll if we have time at the end, we'll circle back to that question. If not, we'll specifically follow up to you. I want to give Sam kind of the opportunity to round out a little bit. Some of it's the information that we've already been talking about, and you've touched on it a little bit. But TAM analysis, ICP, all of that is really important. But really, when the rubber meets the road, it's all about how are you ensuring that your right team members are working what we deem good accounts, right? That can be a challenge or a business thing that creates some conflict operationally, but would love to know how you're handling it.
Yeah, I think that you have to remove as much friction as possible. You want human element to influence the models, right? You do. I mean, in forecasting, to your point, Jason. Yeah, we use data. We use a weighted forecast, and then we use a human element to be more, subjective, and then we combine those together to get within 5% of our forecast. That's probably a different conversation on a different webinar, is forecasting and go to market and how to do it effectively. But I think what's important is that sales reps, sales development, they want to be selling, right? Anything and any activity that takes them away from being in front of clients and selling your company's product and or service, they don't want to engage in, right? Truthfully. They don't like meetings. They don't like updating Salesforce. They don't enjoy sourcing prospects and accounts. And some are great at sourcing, right? Some are fantastic at it. They understand the ICP. They understand how to reverse engineer their wins and their losses and avoid the losses that they've historically had. But most don't enjoy doing it, even if they are effective at it. And I'll tell you a story. There was a company here locally that sold a large whale watching company, and it was broadcasted across the entire company that this massive company, this massive deal, $1 million deal closed. The entire SDR's pipeline became whale watching companies. And so for a month, they're going after whale watching companies. And again, that's what we're talking about, that gravitational pull. And you don't want to leave it up to your future pipeline, up to just the boots on the ground. And so I think it's important that you understand that they don't want to source, nor should we want them to source or spend their time on activities that we can be more effective and more intelligent with through machine learning. Kind of rounding out this topic, we have a customer, a large CPG, a name by which we will not mention, but a large one that sells beverages to local restaurants, essentially. And we first addressed with them is that their reps were spending time trying to uncover which restaurants were opening and closing in their local regions. They were also spending a tremendous amount of time thumbing through COVID restriction data as well. Which restaurants were open for business, in-store dining, which ones were still open but doing deliveries, and which ones were closed down completely. And then they were also having a difficult time identifying which restaurants most likely won't come out of this pandemic as a result of maybe starting their restaurant right before the pandemic. They had all their startup costs up front, and then they didn't have that grand opening, that massive uptick to gain a customer base. And so what we did with this group is that we helped them identify tens of thousands additional businesses, right, through leveraging the power of external data, using their historical data, win-loss data, coupled with current market data, such as COVID data or market trend data, to be able to influence and maybe override their historical wins and losses as to what an ICP might look like in that particular time. And then what we do on a bi-weekly basis, we help them score using machine learning and their current wins and losses, and we adjust that score on a bi-weekly basis to prioritize their field sales team. So those that are with the trucks and they got the hand trucks, bringing in the drinks, those are the sales reps for this company, and we're helping them prioritize which restaurants they should go to first versus last. And it's been tremendously impactful for that business that we've now been able to talk about other use cases in other sites in other countries that are going to adopt the similar approach. And so using that machine learning to not only identify new customers or identify the ICP, to identify the TAM, but then to prioritize the existing books of business, I guess you could say, or the existing restaurants or accounts or prospective clients, is absolutely crucial for their business as they look to hit their targets in a down market.
Sam, I don't know that you could have planned a better lead in kind of to the end of the funnel, which is obviously our customers, right? And so how do we leverage machine learning for efficiencies there? We talk a lot about efficiency. We've talked a lot about the value of machine learning and helping with efficiencies at a business level. And that is no different with our current existing customers, right? When we think about how do we want to prioritize and allocate our resources, we want to, customer success naturally has a lot of information about our customers. We know the industry, we know their contract size, we know how many employees they have. You gather a lot of information through that sales funnel and also working with them. But machine learning can also help us understand the impact of, high revenue contributors. Are they the ones that tend to churn less and retain longer, right? All of that information can feed into machine learning models, which helps us prioritize where there are opportunities to expand those accounts. It also helps us understand and educate to kind of go full circle again back to who are our ideal customers. We can learn a lot about the behaviors and the engagements of our customers that we currently have and determine, the right kind of types of customers that we should be targeting at the top of the funnel, right? When we think about this entire go-to-market function, I've always thought about it like an hourglass, right? We naturally think we go from marketing to sales to customer success, but customer success still has to feed the top of the funnel. We're still learning and educating our current customers. We go back to this idea of planning that Sam briefly touched on. And so I think it's just a natural way to think that machine learning has a really strong business application with financial implications at any stage of the funnel. And we see that every day, especially, again, from my purview with our current customers. I know we're coming up kind of at the top of the hour. Jason, I want to give you an opportunity for final thoughts, and then Sam. And again, if we didn't get to your questions, we'll make sure to follow them up.
Yeah, I think the last thing to drop in there is not so much a wrap up, but when you're looking at applying really anything new from a process, tack, whatever standpoint, in particular dealing with the human element and in particular salespeople, one of the best things that I've found is to have a 1, 2, 3 reps that are very innovative, very receptive to these types of things and stuff like that, and that's your pilot group internally. And so, go work out the kinks with them, do it in a small, sample size context, because otherwise now you're trying to chase, is a problem with the tech, is a problem with the process and the automation, how it's been deployed, is it human behavior, user error, whatever. Work out all those kinks and then get some successes under your belt, get some actual wins. Then roll that out in front of the other sales team. So like you were talking about, Sam, like, hey, they saw a deal close. Now let's all go follow that. You can actually leverage that to your advantage. And so, hey, we brought in a new piece of tech. We applied a new machine learning model, whatever. Look at how successful this was for these reps that we piloted it with. Now you want to go and do that instead of like trying to force them and look over their shoulder and stuff like that to get them to adopt it. Leverage those wins internally and get that in front of them and watch how quickly most of those reps will follow.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I absolutely concur what you just said there, Jason. I think just to summarize here, first, thank you for joining. We're grateful for all of the attendees and the questions and the collaboration. First and foremost, thank you, Brooke and Jason. what I will say is this: is that especially now in this market, we have to be smarter, more surgical than ever before. Even tactics pre-pandemic are not going to be working today, and so we have to leverage things like machine learning, AI, automation, orchestration to be smarter, efficient, more effective in our go-to-market efforts. And it's the power of our internal data with our internal people leveraging external data and understanding those market trends, those external factors to continually to identify, but also to continually adapt that ICP. The fact that we can leverage machine learning in near real time to automatically enrich and score our prospective clients to help us be more effective with the right message to the right client at the right time is truly life changing in go to market. It is something. It's like nirvana essentially if you know how to leverage it and adopt it. And the key is it's not a replacement. It's an enabler for us. It's a way for us to be able to increase our ability to go beyond what we currently can do, so we can do more with less. So thank you again, Brooke. Jason, pleasure.
Awesome. Thanks for having me on, guys.
Thank you.